So we are in incredible transformative times. Now, some of you may be aware of the term dark night of the soul, some not. But it has been referred to more on an individual basis, and this short share is about the dark night of the soul collectively and how this is affecting us individually. The two are interlinked, but this is my reflections on how to navigate how I'm seeing the collective dark night of the soul. So, just to begin, what do we mean by dark night of the soul? It is when the soul, either individual or collective, is pushed into a experience unwillingly where so much is removed, taken away. So there is massive endings, deaths, changes. This is so that the ego, the human ego, can evolve from being remaining attached to a status quo of being and resonating in a particular way that is inhibiting our evolution and growth, that we have, like a plant in a flower pot, we've outgrown that pot, and so that pot shatters. And the dark night of the soul is not planned and will enable us to question everything, because we will find the methods, the tools, the strategies, the gifts, the way of being, our identities, our connections, how we navigate, how we live. So much of that unravels. And it is because through our ego attachments, through remaining in what we think is how things should be, how we should behave, how life should be, how it's all structured and organized, that becomes, rather than a healthy boundary and container, like in the plant pot, it becomes more of a prison, a constraining environment where we can't expand. The dark night of the soul needs to be beyond our ego linear 3D control, so that we move into this, and that's why it's called a dark night, into this unfamiliar, unknown. And the mystics knew about this, and certain communities that practice shamanism also knew about this and would voluntarily assist individuals to go through this initiation of the dark night. This is so that our soul, our intuition, and our connection with spirit takes predominance over the ego mind control of everything being structured and planned and mapped out, where we tread a path that others have trodden with the list of to-dos and know-hows. And so the collective is being thrown into this unknown territory where all the old systems are dismantling. And so I'm sharing this because if we individually understand that this is part of the natural process, we can assist ourselves, families, friends, communities, and globally, holding the awareness frequency that this is the natural process. We are part of nature. We see this occurring through the elements, through the cycles of nature of plants and animals. So how we navigate this individually is how we then see how this is showing up individually, because not only is it happening on the macrocosm where the big systems are disintegrating, because so much of the shadow is being illuminated, because this is part of the dark night of the soul. The wounds come up to be revealed. And so this is occurring on the collective scale, but it will be also being mirrored individually. It will turn up and show up very uniquely for us. So we will find relationships ending, jobs ending, deaths in friends, family, completions, divorce, illness. All these endings are happening so that we can start again. Now, I want to relay this message that when we individually and then witness this collectively, this dark night, we want to hold on. We don't want the shadow to come up. We don't want to feel the grief and all that can come up with it. And so we will hold on even tighter. And yes, that does cause suffering and pain, but there, in my experience, and I've had a few of these dark nights, there's no avoiding that, because we hold on because of the wounding, because of the programming, and we need to understand that through experiencing that. But when we move through it, we are then able to surrender and let go. And when we arrive at that moment, it is easy. So I have heard others, and I understand why they share this. In a way, it could be to show that there is hope, and to maybe to get the ego mind on board, to say attachment causes suffering. That's very key to the Buddhist teachings. But with the dark night of the soul, and with more of an alchemical and shamanic perspective, there is an embracing of that through being, again, this is very Buddhist as well, through being the witness and the observer. Now, from an alchemical and shamanic perspective, and probably other spiritual traditions, but those have been the two key influences and paths that I resonate with, we see it in a wider spiritual context, that it is part of the cycle, the spiral of change that is divine. There is divine timing, and we are held divinely. And when we are aware of that, we can then drop into our intuition, drop into our body, drop into our emotions, and witness and observe this through our soul and heart, expanded heart. We are able to feel we are held. So there is faith, there is trust there, even when we are in the depths of despair, maybe, in the darkness, in the dark night of our soul. Because there is always that inner flame, that soul vibration deep in the heart, which is a frequency that is always a light, that is never dimmed, that never can go out. And so the collective, and I call it the inverted matrix, wants us to believe we are not part of nature, that we can be programmed and then be partially or wholly assimilated into artificial intelligence, this transhumanism. Because even with all of that, still the soul light cannot be diminished. We can be led to believe that that is the case, that we're all the same, and that nature is something to be controlled and contained, but the light won't go out. And so I'll end this share here with this last reflection. It is becoming aware of the collective consciousness going into the dark night of the soul. And there is an unconsciousness around that. The collective consciousness is becoming awake. And we are doing that through our individual journeys through this process. Individually, we are going through a dark night of the soul because this is happening collectively. So even if you're finding in your own life that everything is blossoming and it's all wonderful and you are still part of the collective consciousness. So wherever we are, whether we've just come out of a dark night or we're going into one or we are in one individually, it's being able to differentiate from the collective energy. And we do this through becoming aware and self-aware, being the observer. There is this, and I will end this shortly because I keep thinking of other things to add. There is this idea that the dark night is just a singular individual process experienced by the individual, and I am depositing that that is not the case, and I think we can see that is not the case collectively. So I'm just depositing my perspective through a shamanic and alchemical viewpoint and a bit of Buddhism. And so it may have been, and this is not, you may think this sounds negative, but it's not, it's actually not, is that the dark night, so if we take on that, okay, there is a collective dark night because we are connected to the community, we are evolving as a humanity, we are being pushed and accelerated, that's the positive side of what we're witnessing, is that individually we may have been in a dark night for a whole lifetime in a way. Those of us who were born into challenging families where there was a lot of ancestral trauma and dysfunctionality. And so we start seeing that there's different layers, different arcs of our soul journey. So we're dispelling the myth, and it's in the spiritual arena, that the dark night of the soul can be contained, controlled, and we just have one. Well, that's not my experience. We can go through cycles because it is a spiral. The soul's journey is not linear. It's not logical and it's not rational. And therefore we can go through several dark nights and they come in ways that we don't wish for because they bring up the trauma to be released and healed. So we can support ourselves and the collective, knowing that this is the natural cycle and that we are organically made through creation, source, divinity, to grow through this natural process. It's not a dysfunction. And yes, some people navigate this through numbing, dialing down, taking antidepressants, for instance, because the system, and maybe we have responsibilities, it's hard. to have space to be in the dark night, because it requires us to sit in that unknowing. And sometimes that can mean that we are not so able to function 100%. So I don't have all the answers with that, especially when we have, responsibilities of looking after family members, for instance, and we need to make money to pay our bills. But I'm hoping that this at least gives a context so that we don't need to be harsh and judgmental on ourselves. We can understand there is a broader, wider spiritual context for the dark night, and to separate what is occurring with the collective with ourselves individually. I mean, many of us have been so used to understanding that we navigate the world through our own individual prism. But the evolution that is occurring is that we're realizing we are evolving on a collective scale. So then the shift goes to, how do I navigate this individually, not just with what is occurring in my own life, but how I separate from what is occurring with the collective unconscious, if you like. And so we see the bigger, broader picture, know that we are held, and that even when we are attached, even if we go into regret or denial or anger or shame, all of that is the wounds, the programmings, the attachments being released. And there is a completion to this cycle. And in fact, when we allow ourselves to drop into the knowing which we hold in our soul, that this is a natural part of creation, we are creation, we are held, and to ask to be held by spirit through our soul, that we don't have all the answers through our ego mind. The system doesn't have the answer when we are going through this dark night of the soul. It is requiring us to access a wisdom through the heart and soul, through our intuition, through our body, even through our emotions and our feelings. It is not logical. And to have patience, tenderness, softness, compassion, maybe forgiveness and love. When we see that many others are experiencing this individually, when we see it's a collective evolution, this may help. Because all through it, our soul is shining. All through this, there is this awareness that is holding us, that knows, even when we forget, even when we doubt. And that is why certain peoples, communities in the past, parallel, maybe the future, would hold individuals to go through this significant gateways, like from adolescence to adulthood, for instance. And we have the remnants of that through certain ceremonies, like in baptism, or when we have funerals. We know that we need individually to be held by the collective spiritually through these moments of transition. So what I'm saying here is, individually we are being called upon to hold the spiritual context for ourselves and for the collective. This is the wake-up call. And when we experience all the shadow coming up, the trauma, the pain, the suppressed emotions, that is the clearing. That is enabling us to go into surrender so that we can be in the light, the soulfulness being held spiritually. So, thank you for listening. Sending all of us always, always lots and lots of love.